Hey everybody, it's Chris from Beer Bearings. Welcome back. It's Friday. Hope you enjoyed last week's video where I had Jennifer in on her birthday to talk about Gnarly Barley Planet Juice. If you didn't catch that, I think you ought to go back and see it, if nothing else, just for the hat that Jennifer was wearing, which she made herself. This week I'm doing what I promised I would do a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to talk about adjuncts and adjunct lagers. And I've got two beers in front of me. I've already got them open because we talked about the Faubourg a couple of weeks ago. And this is a Budweiser. And if you haven't had a Budweiser and you live in America, I would be shocked. So I'm not going to go through all of the preparation of opening it up and all of that, but I will go ahead and pour these. So let's talk about adjuncts. So adjuncts, easily defined or simply defined, is any source of fermentable sugar in a beer that is not malted barley. Okay, so the difference between these two beers, for example, and I'll go ahead and top off the Bud here, or at least bring it to the same level as the Faubourg. So the difference between these two beers is the Faubourg is an all-malt beer. It is a Czech-style Pilsner. It's Czech yeast, Czech lager yeast, two-row malted barley, and Saaz hops. So really very straightforward, very simple beer, very close to a Pilsner Urquell. More about that in a minute. And then the Budweiser actually harkens back to Adolphus Busch's attempt to recreate Czech-style Pilsner. So this was all the rage in the middle of the 19th century. Pilsner Urquell, or the Pilsen Lager, was first brewed in 1842. It didn't really make its appearance in North America until much later, more like the 1870s. Budweiser really was an innovator in terms of beer production, beer shipping, vertical integration. You guys who are deeply into business, you'll know what that means today. That means basically owning all of the different inputs that you need to not only produce your product, but also ship it to market it yourself, all of that. He was a vertical integrator of the first order, Adolphus was, and they learned in attempting to try to make essentially this style of beer with American malt that they couldn't do it because American malt has too much protein. The six-row barley that was available at the time has too much protein in it, and it made it look hazy and not very appealing as a final product. So he and his brewmaster finally struck on the idea of using rice as a sugar source. They did that, adding about 30% rice, at least that's what the recipe is these days, around 30%, and they alter it depending on availability and different characteristics of the malt. But what that does is ferments out a little more dry and also provides sugar without the protein. So it's rice, it's actually very similar to the rice you buy in the store. It's been polished. The bran is gone, so it's very much like the rice that you put in your pot in the house and make some rice for your jambalaya or your gumbo or whatever you use rice for in your house. So that's the difference between these two. There's only barley here, there's rice over here. So I'm going to give these a taste, and we're going to take a look at them first. And I'm going to do this side by side. So first of all, let me get them by the stems here. Budweiser is crystal clear. It does go through some filtering processes on the way to final packaging and on the way to finally being out the door. The Faubourg is, I would say, basically the same color, although it's just a tiny bit hazy. So I'm going to go with really light straw, maybe medium straw on the Faubourg. One of the things that Adolphus wanted to do was that he wanted to make a lighter beer, a beer that was easier drinking, to accommodate the hotter climate in America, much warmer than it is in Europe in general, and also the kind of go-go culture in America. The German beer garden tradition is to kind of sit and sip and talk to your friends and maybe play a game and read the paper and argue about the news of the day or whatever. You know what we do in America? We drink. So we order a beer, we drink it, we might eat along with it, and we order another beer and we keep going, right? So even in the mid 1800s, that was pretty much the same. So that hasn't really changed. So he's trying to brew a lighter beer. Let's see how he did. That's a Bud. It is, it's an easy drinker. It's got a little bit of base kind of background bitterness. It's actually a little bit of apple notes in it. And interestingly about that, some people say that it's acetaldehyde, which is an off flavor, and it's not, it's objectionable, but it's not. It is actually from the yeast. It's actually an ester that is created because they lager this beer at a little bit warmer temperature, so that allows the yeast actually to produce some esters. It's actually kind of pleasant, and it's a real hallmark of the style or of this particular brand. So, if you ever try to identify this thing blind, look for the apple, and maybe you'll be able to pull it. It's definitely in there. Whereas over here we've got Faubourg, and again, all malt. And I recall this being a really nice Czech style pils from the last time, so let me try that. Really much different. So, again, this beer is formulated and brewed to appeal to the widest possible audience. This one is brewed to appeal to, slightly more people who want a little bit different flavor, a little more chewy lager, a little more complexity. There's definitely more complexity here. It's Czech style all the way. And I'll tell you again, if you live in New Orleans or anywhere in the distribution area for Faubourg and you haven't tried this yet, please do, because it's very different from the old Dixie lager, which was actually an adjunct lager. Adjuncts get a bad name. You hear all the time in craft beer circles, blogs, Instagram, wherever, YouTube probably, people talking about the evils of adjunct lager. In fact, especially when Adolphus went to start brewing this beer, rice actually cost more per bushel than barley did, so it certainly wasn't a cost-saving measure. It was really a measure to try to brew a very similar style beer to Czech pils here in America using the ingredients he could get his hands on. So that's really what it was about. And adjuncts have been used in beer since really beer started to be brewed. Certainly in colonial America and early times here, they were using any starch source they could think of. Barley didn't grow very well in most places in the colonies and in early America. So they were using pumpkin. They were using walnut tree chips, according to one kind of famous rhyme that comes down to us. So really any sources of starch that they had around. Pumpkin was a very big one. I've read several sources that talk about pumpkin. There are a large number of beers that are brewed in Europe. Belgian beers, for example, will use something called candy sugar, and there are various qualities of that, sort of light ones and darker ones and so on. So a lot of the Belgian browns will get their kind of raisiny quality from candy sugar, and it's just a sugar syrup. So, adjuncts get a bad name. They really shouldn't get a bad name, and really, even craft beer today, the vast majority of it, East Coast style hazy IPAs, those are adjunct ales. If the brewer decides to use something fermentable like additional fruit or anything else that's a sugar source in the fermenter, then that's definitely an adjunct beer. So it's not necessarily something to be shied away from. It's just kind of gotten a bad name in terms of its association with beers like Budweiser. Now, whether you like Budweiser or Bud Light or Coors or you name it, and by the way, Coors is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine, Coors Banquet. This is not a cheaply produced beer. It is a mass-produced beer, and it's produced in multiple locations around the world, and it's very consistent. If you pick up one of these in the store this week, next week, and 6 months from now, they should all taste about the same, aging notwithstanding. So they really are serious about quality. So is Faubourg, and so is everybody who makes beer. That's the most important thing, to be high quality and to be consistent with your method and your processes. But, I would really resist the temptation to think that this beer is cheap. It's certainly cheap to purchase. It's cheaper than this. But it's not because the ingredients are cheaper. It's a scale thing. AB InBev is a huge company. Faubourg is not, for example. Urban South, Second Line, all those guys around here and all the craft breweries in your town, those are not necessarily big companies, so they don't have the ability to take advantage of big economies of scale like these guys do. So again, whatever you think about the companies and whatever you think about the way they're run, understand that adjuncts are just another source of sugar in the process. Oftentimes it goes into the mash, sometimes it goes into the fermenter, but really that's all it is. It's another source of sugar. It is usually used to promote a little bit thinner body, and sometimes it will give flavor as well. Now, some people will argue that things like tea and coffee and other things that are added into fermentation or at fermentation to give flavor are adjuncts. I don't personally subscribe to that, and I am not a professional brewer, but I've certainly checked in with some people, and I'm most comfortable with the definition of anything that provides a sugar source that's not malted barley that goes into the process, whether it's in the mash or in the fermenter, is an adjunct, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Those pumpkin beers that you like that are going to be coming out pretty soon, you couldn't have those if they weren't adjuncts. So, you know, ease back on adjuncts a little bit. I'm going to pick up the Faubourg this time, and I'm going to say, if you are watching me on Facebook, I would appreciate it if you would invite your friends over, and if you haven't joined, please join yourself and join the Beer Bearings community. If you're watching me on YouTube, I would love it if you would like and subscribe and tap that little bell so that you might be able to find out when more videos come out, which right now is every Friday. So there's either a beer of the week every Friday where I talk about a specific beer, or a video where I talk about a topic like adjuncts. So if you'd like to see me talk about a specific topic, whether it's a specific beer or a style or comparisons or any of that stuff, off flavors, how to taste a beer, let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time right back here on Beer of the Week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.